Thank you, Dr. French. All at the back. Thank you. Hope you haven't broke your ankle. Compensation. There's a claim coming in. Well, thank you so much for that discussion. I'll move swiftly on, if that's okay. We'll come back to any questions. We've got a little question and answer session after our next presentation. So if you've got any questions, please keep them in mind, and we'll come to them in around about 30 minutes' time. Now, moving on to our next speaker. She is from the Living Wage Foundation in the UK, where she's been there since September 2017. She's currently heading up new projects which will develop and drive new benchmarks to tackle in-work poverty. And today she is talking about impacts of paying the living wage. Ladies and gentlemen, Martha Crawford.
Sorry, I've got my notes up on my laptop. But I will stand here. Great, so I just want to say a big thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, particularly among such a kind of illustrious group of people, because I'm actually not presenting any of my own research. I'm going to be talking about other people's research. So I'm Martha Crawford, and I work at the Living Wage Foundation, where I've only been since September, but I have been part of the larger organisation which the Living Wage sits under, Citizens UK, for about 2.5 years. And I am managing a new project which is about other ways to address in-work poverty, which I'll talk about at the end, because at first I want to kind of talk about the living wage movement. And I am aware of the fact that we've all just had lunch and there was lots of bread and carbohydrates, so if I see anyone sleeping, I'll completely understand why. So the Living Wage Foundation and movement is a kind of independent movement of employers, organisations and people who campaign on the very simple idea that a fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay. And we celebrate and recognise the leadership of employers who go further to kind of pay all staff, including their supply chain, and there's been lots of talk about the kind of supply chain and procurement in this, and I've pulled out some case studies that I thought would be most interesting to kind of people in this room. And so the way that we calculate our rate, and it is a voluntary rate, so we sign up employers in a voluntary way, is that it's based on the cost of living and not the government's minimum. So in the UK, we have something called a national living wage, which is very confusing because it's not our rate and it's not based on the cost of living. And I'll get into that later, but I'm going to refer to that rate as the government's minimum, and I'm going to refer to our rate as the real living wage. So I hope that clears that up. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Living Wage campaign and the foundation, where it came from, and the impact it has, it's kind of had to date. And I guess I'm going to talk really about those two things, but then I'm also going to talk about our kind of plans for the future, because we've talked quite a lot about the fact that the labour market is changing, and as kind of organisations in civil society, we also need to be changing with that and responding to those kind of changes. And we had a comment earlier about about the fact that, and someone did a really nice analogy earlier about like a child's toy, it'll just pop up somewhere else, but we have to also pop up somewhere else, and we have to be quicker. And I think that maybe I'm different to other people, and that I actually do think there is potential for change. I'm glad someone else has already mentioned the Brexit word. So next up, I'm going to just show a short video, so you don't have to listen to me for the first half an hour, for the full half an hour.
The Living Wage campaign is an independent movement of businesses, organisations and people who believe a fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay. Since 2001, we've been working to ensure that everyone can earn a real living wage that meets the cost of living, not just the government minimum. The movement began at a meeting in East London when grassroots organisation Citizens UK brought together churches, mosques and schools. One issue came up again and again: low pay. At the time, the government's minimum wage was just £3.70 an hour. Some people were working up to 3 minimum wage jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. A big march down the Mile End Road called for all staff working in East London hospitals to be paid a living wage. This worked. Soon, low-paid workers and community leaders were negotiating to make sure big projects like the Olympics paid the London living wage. And in 2011, the movement went national. the first UK living wage was launched and the Living Wage Foundation was set up. Living wage employers found that paying a decent wage had real business benefits. The more living wage employers talked about the benefits, the more others wanted to get involved. Then, in 2016, the government increased the minimum wage for over 25s. They called the new higher rate a national living wage. This was a step in the right direction. With more than 6 million people paid less than the real living wage, the job is far from done. The real living wage means being able to afford things like healthy food, a warm home, or a birthday treat for your family. In 2016, nearly 3,000 employers have signed up with the Living Wage Foundation, including nearly a third of the FTSE 100 and big names like ITV, Nationwide and Chelsea Football Club. But the job isn't done. Join our movement to end low pay today.
Great. So if we go to the next slide, maybe. So I think we've heard quite a lot about like what government can do and what employers can do individually, and the Living Wage movement is definitely one that has been like championed by employers. But hopefully from the video you got a sense of the fact that this actually came from civil society and families in East London who got together with kind of teachers and faith leaders and said, actually, the government's minimum of £3.70 an hour is not enough for us to live on. And they were hearing multiple cases of, people working 2 to 3 jobs and not being able to spend any time with their families. So that's where the idea of the living wage came from. It didn't come from a kind of bunch of policy people in a think tank. It came from real stories. And I think what's been brilliant about today is we've heard a lot about kind of real stories. So we're quite a unique example of how civil society, employers and organisations can kind of work together with workers and trade union movements to kind of make meaningful change. The number on there of 3,000 employers, we actually hit 4,000 last week. So we've kind of grown the network and it's actually doubled since George Osborne, who was the Chancellor at the time in the UK, brought in the so-called government's living wage. And we've been an organisation that's enjoyed kind of cross-party support. So we've had public backing from both Boris Johnson, who was the Conservative Mayor of London, but also Sadiq Khan, who's our kind of current mayor, as well as the different devolved authorities and the new mayors across the UK, as well as MPs from kind of the Conservative camp, as well as the kind of Labour camp. If we can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, am I able to do that on here? Great. So as you know, we've heard quite a lot about this today, but I wanted to also bring up some stats about the fact that actually it isn't done. So 1 in 5 UK employees earn below the real living wage, our rate. Nearly 1 in 3 women in work earn below the living wage, and 2 out of 3 children in poverty in the UK have a parent who is working. And last year, the Trade Unions Congress found that between 2007 and 2015 in the UK, real wages actually fell by 10.4%. And this was despite an average increase in real wages across the OECD of about 6.7%. So what is it? What is the real living wage? So our London rate at the moment is £10.20 an hour, and the rest of the UK is £8.70 an hour. So every November we kind of announce the new rates, and we kind of have an annual celebration of the 4,000 employers who kind of go further and the people who've kind of campaigned on the ground to make it happen. So this year there was a 45p increase in London, and there was a 30p increase in the rest of the UK. And we've had another really good year, despite the fact that, things are getting worse. We accredited well over kind of 1,000 new employers, including, interestingly, Lush, who I don't know if you have here in the Netherlands, but they're a kind of retailer. They sell kind of handmade products. Over a third of the FTSE 100 companies, including organisations like Diageo, Informa, Landsec. We also accredited Arriva Rail, who I know also run trains here, as well as Everton Football Club, so they joined Chelsea, and also Heathrow Airport, which was our first ever living wage airport, and actually uplifted the pay of 3,000 workers. Universities, as we are in a university, are also a big part of this movement. And last year, both Oxford and Cambridge went living wage. And many of the employers that we work with are actually kind of trying to fight against a little bit this kind of race to the bottom that we've heard about. And they want to do the right thing. And they recognise that in kind of difficult times, an increase in inflation and kind of an ongoing decline in wages, it's really important to pay your staff properly. So this just flags a little bit about like what the difference is. It is independently calculated every year by an organisation called the Resolution Foundation. And it's a calculation that's based on a kind of social consensus of what people think is a decent standard of living. And it changes over the course of time. So, previously a mobile phone wouldn't have been part of that kind of social consensus about what people need to live a decent life. And we use the University of Loughborough's minimum income standard. And it's overseen independently by the Living Wage Commission, which is chaired by the Resolution Foundation, but has on it employers, it has on it like faith leaders and academics. So it's like a broad church that kind of come to what the rate is. And I think most importantly, probably to people in this room, who I'm guessing are under the age of 25, everyone, maybe not me, it does apply to everyone over the age of 18, which is different to the government's minimum wage, which only applies to those the government's minimum applies to those over the age of 25, ours applies to those over the age of 18. And the government's new minimum is based on 60% of median earnings and only by 2020. So it's not calculated on what the cost of living is, it kind of pegs it to average earnings. And the way that we calculate it is on a kind of basket of goods methodology, and it takes into account things like rent, childcare, household costs, as well as travel and personal technology. So to give you a kind of indication of what might go in there, a mobile phone is counted in the basket of goods, but not a smartphone, because it's about having the kind of contact, but it's not about kind of luxury, it's about like a decent standard of living. And there is a week's holiday that is included in the basket of goods, but it is a UK-based holiday, it's not a holiday abroad. These costs of living, these living costs are then calculated across 17 different family types, and there's kind of a weighted representative average, and it's based on how many different family types there are in the economy. And it jumped up quite a lot this year because we've had high inflation costs. And it is higher in London because the cost of living is higher in London. So what do we do at the foundation? We accredit employers who pay the real living wage. And this is what they commit to do if they pay a living wage, if they become a living wage accredited employer. They pay all their directly employed staff the real living wage. They put in place a time-bound plan to roll out the living wage to all their third-party contracts, recognising that the way that contractual arrangements work, that can't often happen overnight. So actually you put in place a plan and it can't be more than 2 years, because otherwise there's no point in saying that you're going to do it. And then the real living wage is particularly important and applies to people who deliver services on kind of premises, so catering, cleaning and security. I think that's particularly relevant kind of given the theme of today, because we can think about hospitality and we can think about the kind of hotel and cleaning and security as a sector in itself, or we can think about it as sitting within other sectors as well. So why accreditation matters. So we have 4,000 employers in membership, but a lot more use our rate. So there are some retailers, quite high-profile retailers that use our rate, but we say that accreditation matters because it is a long-term commitment to the rates, it's a long-term commitment to your staff, and you're kind of locked into this annual increase for all direct and contracted staff. And it's a badge of a responsible employer. So actually, there's quite a lot of evidence and research that actually consumers now look for the living wage badge when they're kind of procuring services, which is what Steve and I were just talking about when he told me about his experience in a kind of living wage overnight setup. So what we do, really 3 things. We do accreditation, so we work with businesses to put a plan in place. So a lot of our work can be automated for kind of SMEs, and SMEs make up 90% of our membership, so I'm kind of not on the side of saying, oh, well, it's all on larger employers, because I think SMEs can pay their part, and we've seen that through our movement. So we can do a lot through kind of automation, but with people with very, very complicated contracts, we will work with them to kind of take them through that process. We also run a service provider recognition scheme. So I think this is important for this particular group because this is your facilities management organisations. So the service provider recognition scheme are not living wage employers, but what they do is they sign up to putting down 2 bids when they bid and go through the kind of tender process. One where they're paying their staff a real living wage, and one which is a kind of market rate bid. And they commit to doing that, and then it is on the employer to pick the one that they are going to go for. We also provide intelligence, so that is kind of how you would implement the living wage, but also influence. So we do something every year called kind of National Living Wage Week, which is a big celebration of employers, and we kind of raise awareness of the issues that low-paid workers are facing, as well as kind of celebrate those in our network who are kind of doing the right thing. So these are some of our principal partners. As you can see, it's like a very varied group. You've got universities on there. You've got massive retailers like IKEA. You've got Nationwide. You've got Burberry. You've got your Oxfams. So, you know, there are some heavy hitters in our network. And these are some of our employers. Probably quite interestingly, it is a real combination of, you know, kind of charity sector as well as your kind of your Googles, but also, you know, we do work with organisations for whom like the uplift is hard every year. So people like Oliver Bonus, people like IKEA, people like Cook, which are a kind of frozen food retail and manufacturing unit. So we do work with people, you know, we're not just working with those who have to uplift one cleaner. We're working with people with big portions of their labour market who kind of uplift pay. And these are some of the real benefits. So this is a kind of word cloud with testimony from workers who are kind of within our living wage network, and the kind of things that they've seen have improved in their lives as a result of working for a living wage employer. So improved well-being, improved standard of life, improved security. And I'll talk to you a little bit about Lynn, who was one of the cleaners at one of our partners, Aviva, and a bit about her story afterwards. But I think one of the things that, you know, obviously we've talked a lot about the fact that there is a kind of moral case for a lot of this work. But actually, one of the things that helps us drive employers to our network is, you know, one, the moral case and people want to do the right thing, but also the fact that it has business benefits. So we did some research with Cardiff Business School where they worked with our network to capture some of the benefits for them. So as you can see, there are real benefits to businesses about being a more values-led organisation. So yeah, 93% of the employers reported that they gained, that they made gains as an organisation by becoming a living wage accredited business. You know, improvements in reputation, but also improvements in things that will actually make a difference on your bottom line, like retention rates, you know, reducing staff turnover and absenteeism, which is obviously a kind of a bigger issue in this sector, as we've kind of already heard today. So I wanted to talk about 2 case studies. The first one is Brewdog, and I don't know if anyone here knows Brewdog. Brewdog beer? Yeah? So Brewdog are a living wage accredited employer. They are a brewery, so they're kind of involved in the manufacturing side, but they also, in the UK, have bars and shops. So after introducing the real living wage for all staff, Brewdog found staff turnover on retail sites fell by a massive 40%, and on one site it went from 240% to 60%. So it was huge improvement. As a result, obviously recruitment costs fell significantly, and there was a 50% increase in staff satisfaction in their pay. But what I think is particularly amazing is the number of internal promotions coupled with the kind of reduction in turnover rates. So that was Brewdog. KPMG and ISS. So KPMG are obviously kind of a big corporate organisation, and they've got one of the big kind of towers in Canary Wharf in London, and they were one of the organisations that we first started negotiating with kind of through Citizens UK on paying their staff a living wage. But they obviously, because of kind of complicated supply chain relationships, we also had to work with their facilities management company, ISS. So full accreditation of UK operations happened in 2012, and the specification of living wage became part of that change management. Obviously, it is a high margin industry, so it involved quite a lot of talking to third-party suppliers, people in kind of cleaning, security, mailing rooms. And they work very closely with the suppliers to introduce things like more flexible shift patterns, more sociable hours for staff. So things like switching cleaning to a day cleaning, which saves you costs because you don't have to open your building for as long. But also it means that actually people kind of, by building relationships with cleaners, cleaners generally have better jobs and they stay for longer. So ISS, as a result of KPMG becoming living wage accredited and ISS paying living wage to all their staff, reported a 40% fall in staff turnover on the KPMG contract. And KPMG made a saving of over £70,000 on one contractor alone after introducing the living wage. So our kind of overall impact, as I said, we now have over 4,000 employers who've committed to paying their staff an hourly rate that meets their everyday needs. And last week, we had the news that actually no one who works for the NHS, which is, I think, the 6th largest employer in the world, will be paid less than the living wage rate as a result of incredible negotiations and very hard work through kind of unions. And the impact of our commitment, of the commitment, has basically touched the lives of 150,000 low-paid workers who are now being paid enough to live on in the UK. And that rises annually with the cost of living. And this has put an estimated £500 million back into the pockets of low-paid workers since the campaign started. And as I said, 90% of our network are SMEs, so it is really getting to some of the organisations that really need this kind of really need to pay people better as well. Not just your kind of big corporate saying they're doing it and like leading the charge and doing something that's impossible for smaller organisations. And I just wanted to share kind of 4 things that I think are key lessons from the start of where this campaign came from. So as I said, this campaign didn't come from employers, it came from low-paid workers and their families who weren't being paid enough to live on and kind of took action through kind of community organising methods. So I think the fact that we have stayed within the Citizens UK as an organisation has kept us alongside the communities whose lives are affected by the living wage. It's based on consensus between employers, employees, trade unions and civil society. And also we are voluntary, so we are celebrating and recognising employers for going further. Citizens UK do turn up outside, people's kind of front doors and do a bit of the stick stuff, but at the Living Wage Foundation we are kind of the carrot. So we celebrate and recognise people that go above the minimum. And most importantly, we do ask people to promote and drive change through their supply chain, which I guess is mitigating a little bit of what Sian was talking about, where people holding their hands up and being like, yeah, but is it actually me? So it's using some of those kind of levers for change. And our future plans, so as I said, recognising the fact that the labour market is changing, we as a foundation are also thinking about how we're changing. We're only 5 years old, but we're kind of struggling to keep up a little bit with changes. So we are looking at consumer power. So we recently kind of did a consumer map of where our living wage employers are, so consumers can start spending their money in the right way. And we did a research report with South Bank Employers Group about the number of customers who would actually make choices based on whether the kind of person that they were procuring services off was a living wage employer. I think it's 75% overall. Interestingly, women are more likely by about 20% than men to choose living wage employers to get services from. Draw conclusions from that as you will. And then Living Wage Plus, which is my project. This is the project that I'm managing, which is looking at the kind of rise in atypical contracts, things that Steve was talking around, bogus self-employment, 0 hours contracts, and how as a foundation we can kind of develop similar benchmarks to the real living wage to drive change through the employer network that we have and wider in the UK, and also going global. So we have been approached by other countries to talk about how we do what we do, and obviously you know, we are not going to go and start doing the living wage in different countries, because it has to come from the grassroots and it has to come from those communities. But something that we're thinking about is how you create the kind of principles of a real living wage so that other countries can kind of adopt similar methodologies that fit within the kind of context that they're in. And the thing that I really wanted to kind of finish up on is the fact that I think it's about the point that someone made earlier about the choices that we all get to make every day. And yes, we do all get to make choices every day in our professional lives, and some of them aren't quite as polarized as I could get a promotion in Paris, or I could you know, help these two women, very vulnerable women, you know, who I've seen that are in trouble in my hotel. But actually, I think that if everyone in this room is going into an industry that has a problem with low pay and has a problem with workers not being treated with dignity, it is actually about how we value our fellow human beings and how we value work, and like what price we put on people that we work with and kind of interact with in that industry. And on that, I just wanted to finish with the real impact of the work that we do, and this is Lynn's story, and Lynn is from Aviva.
My name's Lynn Hannah. I'm 61 years old and I clean at Aviva Norwich.
Morning. Morning. Morning.
I enjoy my job because I enjoy being around the people that are in Aviva, and a lot of them are my friends because I've been there for a very long time.
Yeah, see you later. Bye.
Well, my family means everything to me. My family consists of my husband and my granddaughter, whom we have had since she was a baby. Having a granddaughter who suddenly became our daughter hasn't always been easy. At times it's been very difficult because we did have to take her through the court system. It cost us a lot of money and we never had any maintenance. Financially it was very, very difficult. So you lived from hand to mouth. It made a difference where when Aaliyah would say, "Can I go to McDonald's, Nanny?" I would then turn around and say, "Well, no, we can't." The living wage was introduced in 2014. That meant quite a lot to me. It meant that there was money to be left at the end of each month, rather than just put all the money into bills. It also meant that I was able to actually give up some part-time work, which meant that I was at home more and not feeling so tired. I was able to buy Leah a laptop for homework because she's now going to be taking GCSEs. The living wage makes me feel very proud to be working for Aviva. It gives you higher self-esteem. It gives you more confidence. You can hold your head up high. It makes me feel quite emotional to think about it, and it's made me want to stay there. I wouldn't want to go anywhere else.
That's it from me.